All right, get ready. Today we're going to be diving deep into the intersection of spirituality, sexuality, and neurobiology. Yeah,
Oh,
I know, right? Super interesting stuff. You send over some really fascinating sources. YouTube videos from Darren Main
mm-hmm.
and gay men going deeper, exploring spirituality and sexuality and the lives of gay men.
Yeah.
And also a Medium article by Jose Sinek
Yes.
that goes into neuroimaging
Yeah.
and how it's being used to study gender identity and sexual orientation. So we're going to try to unpack all this and pull out some of the most surprising things, and hopefully you'll have a few aha moments along the way.
Yeah, it's such an interesting mix of personal stories and like groundbreaking research, and they
Yeah,
all kind of force us to rethink our assumptions about all these things, sexuality, spirituality, even just like what identity is.
exactly. So let's start with those YouTube videos.
Yeah.
You know, it was really powerful to hear these speakers talk about reconciling their faith and their
Mhm.
sexuality.
Yeah.
And one speaker shared this story about his dad. They had a personal conversation about his sexuality.
Hmm.
And then the very next Sunday, his dad preached a sermon condemning homosexuality.
Oh my
It's like,
gosh.
talk about emotional whiplash,
It's
right?
intense. That's a real like perfect example of the tension between like what society expects and what your family expects and like what you feel inside.
Right.
Both these speakers had to like unlearn years of messages,
Yeah. Yeah.
about sexuality and especially gay sexuality because of their religious upbringing. And it's like they have to, tear down those beliefs and like rebuild their whole sense of spirituality. And
Yeah,
that's where the healing happens.
absolutely. And another speaker talked about finding like solace and acceptance in an affirming church
Hmm.
and how different that was from what he called um, the emotional hypnosis of public confession
Wow.
that he'd experienced in a previous church. That really stuck with me.
It's powerful imagery, that idea of public confession as like emotional hypnosis.
Yeah.
Just think about it, like you're under pressure to conform, you have to display your guilt and shame in front of everyone. It can be so damaging, especially if you're already dealing with like stigma from society and internalized homophobia.
Oh, for sure. And, they talked about this idea of a Baptist hangover, those like negative thoughts and guilt that can stick around even after you've left that environment.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah. So it made me wonder, have you ever felt that kind of tension between what you believe and what other people expect of you? And if you have, how did you deal with it?
I think that's something everyone struggles with in one way or another.
Yeah.
We've all had times when we felt pressure to just go along with things, even if it didn't feel right, whether it's family, culture, even work sometimes.
Yeah.
Like those messages can really stick with you. It takes like introspection or finding a good community, maybe even therapy to really untangle those beliefs and find your own truth.
Yeah, for sure. It's so important to find those spaces where you can just be yourself. Okay, now let's move on to that Medium article. Honestly, the idea that we can use neuroimaging to see how the brain works and how it relates to gender and sexuality, it's just wow.
It really is amazing. Like they're finding structural differences in the brains of cisgender and transgender people,
Oh, wow.
especially in the regions of the brain that deal with like body perception and self-awareness.
Okay, so what does that mean, really? Like, what are these brain regions and how are they different?
So take the cortex, for example, the like outer layer of the brain.
Okay.
Research shows that transgender people might have variations in the thickness of some parts of the cortex compared to cisgender people. And these are the parts that are involved in how we see our bodies and our sense of self.
So you're saying we can actually see these differences in brain scans?
Yes.
That's wild. What about sexual orientation? What kind of insights are we getting there?
There are some interesting findings there too. For example, studies have shown that in certain brain regions, homosexual men actually have thinner cortices compared to heterosexual men. And what's even more interesting is that the structure of those regions in gay men is more similar to those of heterosexual women.
Wait, so you're saying there are actual measurable differences in brain structure that correlate with being gay or straight?
Yeah,
That blows the whole it's a choice argument out of the water, doesn't it?
definitely. These findings suggest there's a biological basis for both gender identity and sexual orientation. It's not just about how you were raised or who you hang out with, but, and this is important, we have to be careful how we interpret this research.
What do you mean?
Well, just because we see a correlation doesn't mean we know what causes it. Just because there are differences in brain structure doesn't mean we fully understand how genes, hormones, and the environment all work together to shape these aspects of ourselves.
So there's still a lot we don't know, but this is definitely opening up new ways of understanding the complexities of human sexuality and gender. And it's like Connecting back to those YouTube videos, we're talking about real people grappling with these very ideas.
Right.
And now science is starting to give us a biological basis for their experiences. It's like these different fields of knowledge are starting to come together.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time. As we learn more, we see how personal stories, societal ideas, and scientific discoveries all intersect, and that gives like a more complete picture of what it means to be human.
I love that.
And it makes us rethink how we approach issues of identity, acceptance, and inclusion, not just on a personal level, but like as a society.
Absolutely. And that leads us perfectly into the next topic.
Right.
Spiritual awakenings. Those like transformative, sometimes really intense experiences
Right.
that can completely change how you see yourself in the world.
It's like suddenly seeing everything in 3D.
Right. And one of the speakers in the video, he described it as waking up from a dream.
Yeah, and it often starts with some big life event like a breakup, losing your job, even like a death in the family. It's like something shakes you out of your everyday routine and
Yeah.
makes you confront these huge questions about life.
Yeah, definitely. So what happens after that initial wake-up call? Does it get easier?
Well, not necessarily. The next stage is usually described as bliss, and it's like you tap into this amazing feeling of joy and connection, and everything just seems so vibrant. You might even feel this oneness with everything around you. Life takes on a whole new meaning.
That sounds incredible. But I have a feeling it doesn't last forever, right?
You got it. The bliss is usually temporary. It's more like a glimpse of what's possible, and it usually leads into what they call the dark night of the soul.
Uh, hmm.
Yeah, this is where things get really intense. It's like all those unresolved issues, those suppressed emotions, all the things you've been avoiding,
Oh, no.
they all come to the surface.
Yikes. So it's not all sunshine and roses then?
Not really. The stage can be super challenging, but it's also where the deepest healing and transformation happens. It's
Yes.
like confronting your shadow self, all those parts of yourself that you've been hiding. It can be painful, but it's necessary for real growth.
I can see how that would be both terrifying and liberating at the same time. So you're dealing with all this inner turmoil. What comes next?
Well, then you enter the void.
Yeah.
Might sound scary, but it's actually a space of like stillness and integration. After all the chaos of the dark night of the soul, the void is a chance to rest, to process what you've gone through. It's like the calm after the storm.
I see. So it's like a time for reflection and getting your bearings before you move forward.
Exactly. And then once you've found that stability, you enter the stage of grounding. This is where you start to build a new life
Okay.
based on this new understanding of yourself and the world. It's about forming healthy habits, setting boundaries, and creating a life that supports your spiritual growth.
So you're basically putting the pieces back together, but in a way that's more authentic to who you are.
Right. And as you keep going on this journey, you eventually reach the stage of meaning and purpose. This is where things really start to make sense. You have this newfound clarity, a sense of direction, and a deeper understanding of your gifts and how you want to share them with the world.
So it's like you finally found your calling, your reason for being here. But from what I understand, spiritual awakenings aren't just a one-time thing, right? They're an ongoing process.
Totally. It's a journey of constant growth and evolution. There will be ups and downs, twists and turns.
Sure.
But with each stage, you gain more wisdom, compassion, and connection to your true self. And that's what makes it so rewarding.
Like a spiral, always moving upwards, even when it feels like you're going through tough times. What are some of the common misconceptions about spiritual awakenings?
I think a lot of people think it's always blissful and easy. Like we were saying, it can be really painful, especially during the dark night of the soul.
Yeah, I can see that.
Real transformation often means facing your deepest fears and letting go of all those old patterns that no longer serve you.
It's like a purification process, getting rid of what doesn't work to make room for something new.
Exactly. And another misconception is that it's only for certain types of people or that you have to be super religious or spiritual to experience it.
So anyone can have a spiritual awakening.
Absolutely. Spiritual awakening is all about connecting to a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in life.
Yeah.
And that's something that resonates with everyone, regardless of your beliefs or practices.
It's that human desire to understand who we are, why we're here, and what it all means.
Exactly. We all have the capacity for spiritual growth and transformation. It might just take a certain event or experience to set it off, and those triggers can come in many forms.
Right, like a sudden loss, a near-death experience, even just reading a book or watching a movie that really touches you.
It's like a spark that ignites a fire within. pushing you on a journey of self-discovery and transformation. And the beauty of it is that journey is unique to each person. There's no right or wrong way to experience it.
Like we all have our own path, our own lessons, our own contribution to make.
Exactly. And those awakenings can help us uncover those unique gifts and really step into who we are.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've heard personal journeys, talked about the amazing world of neuroimaging, and explored those transformative spiritual awakenings. What's resonating with you the most so far? What's standing out as particularly interesting or surprising?
Honestly, what I find most fascinating is how all these things, personal stories, scientific findings, and spiritual insights are all coming together.
Yeah,
It's giving us a richer, more complete understanding of what it means to be human.
totally. We're starting to see the interconnectedness of everything. Biology, spirituality, our lived experiences, it's all part of what makes us who we are.
And realizing that is both humbling and empowering. It shows us that we're not just separate individuals, but part of something much bigger.
Like we're all connected, threads in a giant web of life.
And within that web, each of us has a unique role, a unique contribution to make.
So what does it all mean? What's the takeaway from all these converging fields of knowledge?
I think it's about embracing a wider view of ourselves and the world around us, questioning our assumptions, being open to new possibilities, and honoring the incredible diversity and complexity of human experience.
It's like we're being invited into a new era of understanding, one where science and spirituality are no longer seen as opposites.
And that's a really exciting prospect.
Definitely. All right, before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've explored so far. We've heard personal stories of reconciliation between faith and sexuality, delved into the world of neuroimaging and what it tells us about the brain, and explored the transformative power of spiritual awakenings.
It's been an amazing journey so far.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In the next part, we'll keep exploring these themes, looking at the impact on society and culture, and digging deeper into how we can apply this knowledge to our everyday lives.
I can't wait to see what other insights and connections we uncover.
Me too.
Yeah.
But for now, let's take a break, let everything sink in, and come back ready for more exploration. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. It's amazing to think about how those personal stories and the science of neuroimaging are all kind of giving us a bigger picture of how ideas around gender and sexuality are changing.
It's like we're seeing a cultural shift happening right before our eyes. All these sources are really pushing us to rethink those old assumptions and embrace a more complex view of identity.
Exactly. For centuries, societal norms have dictated these rigid categories, these
Yep.
expectations about gender and sexuality.
Yeah,
But those personal stories and the scientific evidence from neuroimaging, they're all pushing us beyond those limitations.
yeah. It's like
Yeah.
science is finally catching up to what so many people have known all along, like deep down, that we're way more complex than those simple categories that we've been put into.
The research is showing us that there is a real biological basis for gender identity and sexual orientation.
Right.
It's not just like a psychological thing or a social construct.
It's a huge message, especially for folks who have been discriminated against or told that who they are is wrong or unnatural. It's like science is saying, hey, diversity is built into our very biology.
Exactly. And then when you connect that scientific understanding with those personal stories from the YouTube video, you really see the impact of those societal messages that try to force people into those narrow boxes.
It was really hard to hear how those speakers struggled with, feeling like they had to choose between their faith and their sexuality, facing rejection from their families and communities, just heartbreaking.
It really underscores the need for greater understanding and acceptance,
Yeah.
We need to create spaces where people can safely explore their identities without feeling ashamed or afraid.
Absolutely. Spaces where people can be their true selves and connect with others who understand what they're going through.
And it's not just about creating safe spaces, it's about challenging those deep-seated biases and prejudices that cause so much harm.
Right.
It's about fighting for policies and practices that ensure equality and justice for everyone, no matter their gender identity or sexual orientation.
A call to action, for all of us to really examine our own beliefs, to challenge those harmful stereotypes, and to actively work towards a more inclusive and equitable society.
And I think that's where this whole concept of spiritual awakening becomes really important.
Oh, yeah. Those 6 stages from the Gay Man Going Deeper video.
Right.
That initial wake-up call, then the blissful honeymoon phase, followed by that intense dark night of the soul. It's like a wild ride for your soul.
It is, but ultimately it's all about moving towards greater self-awareness, authenticity, and connection to something bigger than ourselves. And that journey can have a profound impact on how we interact with the world.
So how does a spiritual awakening tie into these larger conversations about societal change and inclusivity?
Well, as people go through those stages of spiritual awakening, they start to shed those layers of conditioning, those societal expectations,
Okay.
and they often develop a much deeper sense of empathy and compassion for others. They start to see the world through this lens of interconnectedness, recognizing our shared humanity.
It's like breaking free from those narrow, ego-driven perspectives and stepping into a more heart-centered way of being.
Exactly. And that shift in consciousness can be a real driving force for social change. When we start to see ourselves in the experiences of others, when we realize that our freedom is bound up with the freedom of everyone, that's when we're motivated to dismantle those systems of oppression.
Yeah, it's like that saying, none of us are free until all of us are free.
Exactly. And I think that's where those personal stories from the YouTube videos become even more powerful. They show us how individuals, through their own self-discovery and spiritual awakening, can become agents of change, inspiring others to question the status quo and work towards a more just and compassionate world.
It's really inspiring to see how those speakers found the courage to challenge those deep-rooted societal and religious norms,
Yeah.
to embrace their true selves, and advocate for others who are marginalized.
Their stories give us hope and a path forward, a
Yeah.
way to create a more inclusive and loving world.
Okay, so before we go on to the next part, let's take a moment to think about this. What are some of the potential pitfalls or challenges when these conversations about gender, sexuality, and spirituality all intersect?
That's a great question. One thing to watch out for is the risk of oversimplifying complex issues or using spirituality to kind of bypass those very real systemic issues that lead to discrimination and inequality.
Can you say more about that?
Sure, spirituality can be a powerful tool for personal growth, but we have to be careful not to use it to, like, spiritualize oppression.
Yeah.
You can't just say, oh, people can just transcend their circumstances through positive thinking or meditation and ignore the real problems.
So it's not about denying those systemic issues, but about using spirituality to, like, empower yourself to work towards dismantling them.
Exactly. And another potential pitfall is the risk of appropriating or misusing spiritual concepts from cultures that have been historically marginalized.
Right.
It's so important to approach these conversations with humility, respect, and a willingness to learn from those with different lived experiences.
So it's about being aware of power dynamics and making sure these conversations are truly inclusive and represent diverse viewpoints.
Exactly. We need to create spaces where everyone feels safe and respected, where their voices are heard and their experiences are valued.
Yeah, and recognize that these conversations are ongoing, always evolving, and constantly being shaped by new knowledge and new experiences.
Right. It's a journey, not a destination. And the more we have these conversations with open hearts and open minds, the closer we'll get to creating a world that's truly just, equitable, and compassionate for everyone. It's really interesting how these conversations about spirituality, sexuality, and identity are kind of changing right alongside all these advances in science and technology.
It's true. It's like these scientific discoveries are giving us like a whole new vocabulary to talk about ourselves.
Yeah.
A vocabulary that's based on, evidence and observation.
Yeah. And that new language can be so powerful. It helps us move past those old narratives,
Yeah.
the ones that have been used to like control and marginalize people.
Yeah, totally. It's like we're
Yeah.
taking back our own stories and grounding them in both personal experience and scientific understanding.
Right.
And that's especially important for those who have been told their identities are wrong or, somehow against nature.
Absolutely. Like the research on neuroimaging, it's concrete proof that challenges those harmful ideas. It shows us that diversity is literally part of our biology. It's woven into our brains.
Yeah, it's like science is finally proving what so many people have always felt to be true. Speaking of, like, intuition and feeling, I'm curious about how you see science and spirituality interacting. Do you think they're like two sides of the same coin? Or are they totally opposite?
That's a great question. I actually see them as more complementary than opposed. For a long time, they've been seen as separate things, maybe even conflicting with each other.
Yeah.
But I think we're starting to understand that they're both part of a bigger picture.
How so? How do you see them coming together?
Well, science at its heart is all about exploring the unknown, right?
Mhm.
Trying to understand the rules of the natural world. And spirituality, it's also about exploring the mysteries of existence, trying to connect to something bigger than ourselves, finding meaning and purpose.
So both are driven by that, like basic human curiosity, that desire to figure out who we are and where we fit in.
Exactly. And as we dig deeper into both, we start to see some really interesting overlaps. Like that research on neuroimaging, it's revealing how our brains work and
Yeah.
showing us how our thoughts, emotions, even our spiritual experiences are all reflected in our neurobiology.
Wow, so it's like science is giving us a window into the physical mechanisms behind those things that feel so intangible.
And at the same time, practices like meditation and mindfulness, they're being studied for their effects on the brain, on
Mhm.
emotional well-being, even on physical health.
It's like a feedback loop. Science validates the power of these ancient practices, and then those practices inform new scientific discoveries.
It's pretty amazing. And I think this new understanding of how science and spirituality are connected is going to change how we think about our lives,
Yeah.
our health, and even consciousness itself.
It's like we're moving past that old idea that it's mind versus body. We're starting to
Hmm.
see that we're whole beings, connected in ways we're only beginning to grasp.
That's it. And as we embrace this more holistic view, I think we're going to see some incredible breakthroughs in fields like medicine, psychology, even education.
It's exciting to think about what's possible. Let's go back to those personal stories from the YouTube videos for a minute. What were some of the things that stood out to you about their experiences?
I was really struck by their dedication to being true to themselves, even when it was hard. It takes a lot of guts to challenge societal norms, especially when those norms are so ingrained in our families and communities.
It's true. It's like they had to unlearn everything they thought they knew about sexuality and spirituality to break free from those limiting beliefs and find their own way.
Yeah, and by doing that, they became role models for others who are struggling with those same questions about identity and belief.
Their stories are such a powerful reminder that it's okay to question things,
Yeah,
to challenge what we've been taught, and to define for ourselves what it means to live a good life.
and that focus on self-love and self-acceptance. Super inspiring. It reminded me that real freedom starts from within, embracing who you are, even the parts you might not like.
Exactly. It's about knowing you're worthy, no matter what's happened in the past, no matter what messages you've internalized. It's about giving yourself permission to just be yourself, completely and authentically.
That's a message that resonates with everyone, I think, whether you're part of the LGBTQ plus community or not. It's a message of hope, of empowerment, and of all the amazing things that can happen when we embrace our true selves.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into spirituality, sexuality, and the brain, what are your final thoughts for our listeners?
I'd say keep exploring these topics with an open mind and an open heart. Read, watch documentaries, listen to other podcasts, talk to people with different views than your own.
Yes. Challenge your own assumptions, ask yourself tough questions, and be willing to expand your understanding of yourself and the world.
And remember, self-discovery is a journey, not a destination. There's always something new to learn, something new to experience, and something new to integrate into who you are.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep growing, and never stop listening to that inner voice that's guiding you towards your own path.
Beautifully said.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a truly enriching conversation. And to our listener, thank you for sending in those sources and for letting us explore these fascinating topics with you. We hope this deep dive has sparked some new insights, challenged your perspectives, and inspired you to continue your own journey of self-discovery. Until next time.